Culture is a pattern of shared basic assumptions learned by a group of people in order to solve their problems of internal integration and external adaptation. Edgar Schein. If we are to stay true to that definition of the term culture as a conduit through which we can solve some of our toughest problems, then my question to all of us on this Africa Day is: Africans, do our cultures still allow us to solve our toughest problems? Do the practices that we hold so dear and so sacred provide for us an avenue through which we are able to create dignity for ourselves? We're able to create a sense of achievement and self actualization? Or do they hold us in patterns of old problems and old solutions that no longer serve us? We can have all of the sophisticated conversations that we want to have. But if we don't tackle this very soft and silent aspect of who we are, I don't believe we'll ever be able to get to the advancement of our societies that we say we desire. Here's what's dangerous about culture. And here's why it's so easy to name other things as the reason for where we are at, is that culture is invisible. It is such a part of who we are. It is in our language. It is in the way we think, in our psychology. It is to be found in the types of the types of words that we use. It is in our embodiment, right? It is literally living inside of our bones. And so, in many ways, it becomes the last thing we start to look at when we try and define the complexities of where we find ourselves as a continent. And these silent aspects, uninterrogated, are creating huge problems for us. And of course, there are gatekeepers of culture who would not want us to interrogate these things because it threatens the status quo. But here's my invitation to you, citizens of the continent. If you are alive in this body, and if you feel the kind of frustration that I feel when it comes to where we are still at and the kinds of problems we are still discussing, then there is an invitation coming in your direction saying, what part of culture do you need to transgress? What part of culture do you need to betray? Because if we don't betray, if we don't transgress these aspects of our culture, we will continue to loop around the same kinds of conversations until the end of time. And I want to be done with it. And I'm sure so do you. But this calls us to some courageous conversations. I was having a conversation with someone about a year or two ago, and I was saying to them, have you ever considered that aspect of Hunu or Ubuntu or Untu, we all call it different things on the continent, but signifies the same thing. I was asking them if they had considered that aspect of Ubuntu in which, for example, the elder member of the family has a responsibility to say yes to providing to all of the needs of their family, including the extended family, while it is powerful in its light side, carries the shadow for corruption. It's the very same thing. This idea that you create a system of patronage with your kin, right? And that you must be there to provide for them and to give them in the light side. On the shadow side, creates this idea that I must give my people deals. I must give my people um, contracts. I must give my people the job. It's the extension of the same practice. And if we don't interrogate the shadow part of that light side of Ubuntu, of Hunu, we end up in trouble. One of the aspects too that I was discussing is, for example, how in our cultures, people can show up unannounced in your home. And number one, regardless of where you are sitting as an individual, regardless of whether you are trying to solve your child's problem during that time or you are financially strained at that time, you must welcome this neighbor in, and you must accommodate them, and you cannot ask them when they're going to leave. Now, there's a light to that. There's a helpfulness. There is a presence with other human beings' needs that is so powerful. But at the same time, there's a shadow element of that is very dangerous, which is that we lose voice. We lose the capacity to pronounce to others what our own needs are at this present moment that make it very difficult for us to extend ourselves. And there's nothing wrong with being able to do that, but the culture that we are taught makes us lose the power of our no. And so is it surprising that we then get into conversations with other countries who come to our doors and to our borders, not with our needs in mind, but their needs in mind, and we find ourselves not having the capacity within us to say no. The capacity within us to say this is where we start and this is where we stop. I am inviting us to consider that there are much, much softer and subtler aspects of the shadow of the cultures that we hold so sacred that are keeping us in place and with old problems. Another one that I find so fundamentally limiting is this idea of respect for elders. Now, I have a profound respect for people who are older than me. I respect the journeys they've walked. I respect the wisdom that they potentially hold. But the shadow of that respect is that we become beholden to hierarchy, and that our bodies learn obedience to such an extent that we are no longer even able to scream and shout and say, no, this transgresses my dignity. This does not allow me to live a dignified life, because we have such a respect for old leaders. When I train, because often I train people who are much older than me, when I walk into a room and we have to write down our name tags, I always say, I will address you only by your first name. There shall be no Mr. So-and-so and Mrs. Such and such and Dr. Who and who in the context of what we're trying to do here. Because once we create that power distance, it limits my ability cognitively to be as sharp as I can, because I keep being reminded that there is a power in the room that I must respect and that I must bow down to, that doesn't allow me to think straight. There is a responsibility upon all of us to start to transgress aspects of our culture that keep us where we are. We cannot claim to be maturing into leadership when we are still at the reactive stage of leadership, when we are still at that space where we only respond to life as we have been taught it. We have to continue to be creative. We have to continue to movement towards the aspects that continue to allow us to problem solve. I leave this on your lap today. What are the cultural aspects in your environment that are calling for transgression, that are calling for you to betray them so that you can emerge into the fullness of who we know we can be and what we deserve? Happy Africa Day.